oh, that's a reminder then that there was a confusion about importance, what matters and what is secondary and what is primary. Secondary is the external situation. Primary is your state of consciousness that you bring to it. So when the moment you become upset, you've forgotten that. But that in itself can be a sign to become present again. So if you're vigilant about getting upset about things, then you can use it as an alarm clock. Any kind of upset in any situation, it's, I must have confused what primary and secondary. And it's okay. And then you can invite the alertness in. And this is, I sometimes compare it to turning up the light with a dimmer switch, and which is really what it feels like is from the mind-identified reactive state, and suddenly there's still a remnant of awareness from where you can notice, oops, I'm upset about this. And then you can, at that moment, there is a choice. There's a confusion about what is really important here. And then you can invite in presence, attention. And at that moment, there's a shift from the mind-identified reactive thinking state. You might have just been talking to somebody about how dreadful somebody else is, what they just did. So why can't they ever get it right? And why, and suddenly there's still a remnant of awareness in you. And so you begin to witness that inside you. And at that moment you have a choice. You can say, okay, you recognize you got confusion of primary and secondary. And then you go, okay, let's become present. A deep breath might help. Looking around you might help. Anything that brings you into the present moment brings up, you step out of the mind-identified state. What that means when I say you step out of, it means your consciousness removes itself from the thinking. Your consciousness was in the thought forms. You then reclaim the consciousness reclaims itself, so to speak. You reclaim the consciousness from its incarnated form. It's in the thought or emotional form. It had incarnated into this form. This is the dream of consciousness. You reclaim it, or it reclaims itself, because you are ultimately it. And so consciousness then is withdrawn from the form, the thought form, the emotional thought. Well, let's say this is consciousness and this is thought. Then it goes, consciousness was trapped in that thought. It had become that thought. And in the same way that water can become ice. So this is just so consciousness is out of it, and then the thought collapses, because it was only consciousness that had been frozen, had become hardened, so to speak. So consciousness is withdrawn from the thinking, and then it is in its pure no form. And that is it's an amazing thing when that consciousness is suddenly there, that before was trapped in thinking, that you experience a heightened sense of aliveness suddenly. And that is the entire vibrational frequency shifts to one could say, what it feels like, a higher frequency. So, and this is why we call it waking up, because waking up is awakening. Spiritual awakening does not mean to suddenly see angels or talk to God. What do I do? Tell me what to do.
Yes.
That's not spiritual awakening. It's fine if you see angels. It's a beautiful thing. But it doesn't mean that you're spiritually awakened. It just means you're seeing an angel. Or even if you're channeling a spirit entity, it does not mean you're spiritually awakened. You're just channeling a spirit entity who may have a big ego. Who knows? And then that ego gets added to your ego. So the amazing process then is consciousness disidentifies from what it had incarnated into, and that leads to an enormous sense of intensified aliveness suddenly, and that is part of that what we call alertness that arises. And so we call it awakening. It's a term that had been in use for thousands of years. Awakening, and it's for good reason. The Buddha, of course, means the awakened one. Bud comes from the root, Sanskrit root, to awaken. Now, there's a reason why this has been used, because it is very much like somebody who awakens from sleep. And you know how that happens. You're asleep, and then suddenly you go. There's an enormous shift from. It's a very different state of consciousness. And suddenly, and the same thing happens then again from the normal state of consciousness, which is the mind-identified state, which is, from the point of view of the awakened state, is another kind of sleep and another kind of dream. You might think you're totally awake, but you're not. You're totally in your thoughts. And then suddenly, the second awakening happens, and you go from, suddenly you go, oh, complete shift. That's why it's called, and you can feel the entire energy field suddenly shifting. And that may have to happen many times in you. You lose it. It doesn't mean you necessarily stay awakened. Once it can happen. And then the momentum of the egoic consciousness may, of course, reassert itself, and you're in another wave of reactivity and story making and mind identification until you begin to notice again you're upset again. In fact, you've been upset the last 5 hours, but you didn't even know it because it was so normal. By the way, you may people in your own life, there are humans who are upset on a continuous basis. It's almost their normal state. No, they don't know that, because if you live with something all the time, you no longer know it. I compare it to a noise that you hear in a room, generated by some machine or air conditioner or the fridge. And after a few hours, you no longer know that there is a noise. You don't know it. You only know it when suddenly it stops and you say, gosh, has that been going on for all these hours? And suddenly it's so peaceful here. And this fridge must have been on for weeks. And the same with inner state. Many humans still exist whose normal state is basically a state of contraction, tightness, which is a form of upset. And even when there's nothing much happening externally to upset them, they're still upset. And they don't know it, but really they are looking for, when even there's nothing happening externally to upset them, they are looking for an excuse out there to justify their state of upsetness, so to speak. So they're looking for something that they can get upset about because they're already upset inside. There's already that energy field, and they're just waiting for it. It's a bit like, this is how a dream, by the way, happens. People believe that when they have a nightmare and they feel fear, or whatever they feel in the nightmare, they believe that the images in the dream cause the fear. But actually it's the other way around. There is a state of fear in them which the mind attempts to explain, and it creates images that then correspond to what they feel. And this is how a dream arises. The mind creates the dream to explain the underlying feeling of fear. But of course, when we look back at the dream, we think that we felt fear because we saw those images in the dream. No, the mind created them because it needed some explanation for that fear. So it created that.
You can allow the challenge to awaken you, to make you more conscious. This has been done too, like, over thousands of years. Spiritual practitioners have created extreme discomfort in order to awaken. Now there is, the Western mind says, how can they be so stupid? Well, it's not that stupid. I don't recommend it, by the way, but let's just taking yourself out of the comfort zone. They used to do that in ancient times in the West also. In the early days of Christianity, there were the desert. People lived in the desert on almost nothing, depriving yourself of every physical comfort. And even nowadays in India, that tradition still continues. There are humans who create very difficult situations. Some, well, I don't know if they still do this. The ancient example, you sleep on a bed of nails rather than a comfortable mattress, for example. But there are many other things where people inflict physical discomfort, even suffering, on themselves. Now this is not, for most of you, or all of you, that's probably not your path. So please, or if you have to do it, go to India. At least they may support you, but don't tell. I don't recommend it. It's not, so don't blame me. Taking yourself out of the comfort zone in many traditions, this has been a practice, and there is a deep meaning behind that, and there's some insight behind that, because they realize if you take yourself out of, then there is the possibility of awakening is greater. You can even observe it with something very little thing. Let's say you put your hand in very cold water, just as an experiment, and leave it in for 30 seconds. And then the very uncomfortable feeling arises. Or you can do the whole body, jump in. There's a river here. I'm sure it's always very cold. You jump in the river, very unpleasant feeling arises. And let's just stick with a hand. Your hand is in the cold water. And then the first reaction is you want to pull your hand back, or there's a reaction, and this, and then you separate yourself. You just observe the feeling. And then you become the observer of that feeling, which is the observing consciousness. So you have disassociated from the feeling. The feeling is there, but you're not reacting to it. That was a little practice. You step out of identification with the unpleasant feeling. This is why some people as Aaron mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to talk to people in prison later this year, and I often receive correspondence from people in prison. Now, that's not a comfort zone. That's being in prison is the opposite of a comfort zone, and quite a few have reported that through coming into contact with this teaching or some other spiritual teaching, or sometimes spontaneously, they were able to awaken in this situation of extreme discomfort. It operates on every level. Energy flows in when there's a need for energy. Energy exists on many levels. You can have energy, physical energy, or higher energy at higher vibrational frequency, where it becomes consciousness, or it's all consciousness. It's just different vibrational frequencies of consciousness. If you want a stronger physical body, it's not going to happen if you make life for your body as comfortable as possible. That would be nice if it's, okay, I'm going to strengthen my body now. I'm going to lie on this sofa for 6 hours and watch Netflix. The body will get weaker because it's not being challenged. Or you go out and you start some physical exercise, lifting weights, start with small weights. Oh my God. The body doesn't like it. You're making life difficult for your body. You're taking the body out of its comfort zone. And then the mind says, okay, I think that's enough. Or you carry on. Or you start jogging, you start running. At first, why did I get up from my sofa? You shouldn't be. And then there's a gap there. There's not enough energy. But then at some point, whether it's weightlifting or running or whatever, you will experience an influx of energy, which would never have come if the body had remained in its comfort zone. Then it comes, and then you even begin to enjoy the movement because the energy is there. Before it wasn't there. And then the body, if you persevere, the body gets stronger. And that's only on a physical level. Any problem, if you encounter challenges and problems in your life, you can allow the challenge to awaken you, to make you more conscious. A difficult person, for example. Life is full of them. You may have noticed there's always a difficult person somewhere around you. Not you, somewhere. How do you react when you encounter a person who accuses you of something silly or complains, is angry with you or shows you no respect or whatever they may be doing? Yes, in some cases you need to say something, but in many other cases, any reaction would be futile. But the reaction is usually unconscious. And so any unconscious person can pull you down to their level. You're driving, somebody shouts at you, calls you something, you idiot. And you can feel, if the ego is there, you can feel the injury to the ego. He called me an idiot. And immediately, it only takes 1 or 2 seconds, the ego will immediately jump into repair mechanism and shout something back that's even worse than idiot. I don't know what's worse than idiot, but I'm sure there are many things. And then if you're not careful, that guy may stop his car and jump out, and you jump out of your car. Total unconsciousness. Or, same situation happens. He shouts something at you, and you realize it in that very instant. You can be present, or you can react of ego, and you realize, idiot, and you. That would be very disconcerting for the other person. You're simply present. They were just sounds coming out of his mouth. Absolutely nothing to do with you. And you're present. No, this person will become very disconcerted because there's no because the ego wants the reaction. It wants the other to react. It strives on the turmoil. It wants I have the pain body. You might have written and spoken about what I call the pain body that lives in you, which is an accumulation of emotional pain and negativity accumulated since childhood. It lives in you as a kind of energetic entity, so to speak. Sometimes it's dormant. Periodically, it gets triggered by some external event. Then the dormant pain body, the emotion that is painful, then rises up into your mind and forces you to speak and say something through the emotion, then uses your mind. And every thought you think when the pain body has been triggered by somebody or situation, your mind will become, every thought that you think then will be irrational, and you are not doing the thinking. The old emotion in you is doing the thinking in your mind. You are not even there anymore. You're completely asleep, spiritually, completely unconscious. You're in the grip of the old emotion, and you act it out. And it could be a driver. Maybe you triggered this driver, and he shouts, "Ugh!" It's nothing to do with you. This emotion has lived in him for 45 years. And it's just, you were just a convenient trigger. And the pain body is there. The pain body needs you to react. It's desperate. If you don't react, it can't do very much. So it'll try again, say something else. No reaction. But you're not suppressing a reaction, you're simply present. I've done that quite a few times in traffic, because sometimes I'm a bit slow and and people get upset with me and they shout all kinds of things. And I look. And sometimes I think I must be deaf. Then they shout even louder. And then a few months ago, a man did that. And he shouted even louder. And then he shouted, I know you can hear me. Pain body is very important to be aware of in your daily life, because most people have one. Well, virtually everybody has a pain body, but in some people it's much stronger than in others. It varies in strength. In your relationships, it's particularly important to be aware that periodically you act out drama in the relationship. Often a small trigger is enough. It awakens somebody's pain body, and then it tries to provoke the other, and usually it succeeds, and then you cannot argue with a pain body. There's no rational argument. When a person is in the grip of the pain body, the emotional pain body, any rational argument is totally impossible, so don't even try. All you can do is remain in a state of non-reactivity, or, if possible, temporarily remove yourself by walking out of the room if you can't stay just present. So if you are married or you live together, I always recommend that not while the pain body is active. When you're fine, have a conversation so that you can help each other. Next time this emotional turmoil wants to return, the pain body, when you observe it in another person, the beginning of it, come to an agreement that you're going to give the other person a little sign, whatever it may be. And the sign means, could that be your pain body just talking just now? And if you catch it early enough, and the person is already, there's a certain amount of presence that's already in that person. I call it presence power that grows in you. This is it. If there's a certain amount of presence power, then you catch it early, then that other person may become conscious at that very moment of the emotion. And then would say, oh yes, thank you, I got it. And then it cannot rise up and use your mind. It cannot renew itself through the other person's reaction. But even if you live alone, the pain body can renew itself through your thought processes, because thought is also energy. So once the pain body has taken possession of your mind, your thinking becomes deeply negative, very heavy density to it. And the pain body, in that moment, you are the pain body and you are addicted to the negative thinking in that moment. It's an addiction because the pain body feeds on every negative thought. And so you're addicted to it in that moment. So the pain body can feed on other people's reactions, or it can also just feed on your thoughts. Once you're at the grip of it, you have to just wait for it to subside. But the more present you are, the easier it will be to catch it as it arises. And then it will not renew itself by using your mind and creating havoc in your personal relationships. That's all. This is all connected to presence, the arising of presence in your life. And the pain body is a wonderful challenge. And again, it's not comfortable, but that's how we grow. Now, it's extremely important that we practice presence when confronted with world events and so on.